Alright, so it's time to talk about this Google manifesto and the general reaction to it from both the left and the right, as well as my 2 Bitcoin on this. First, having actually read the original source that includes citations and graphics, I can safely say that its publication in Gizmodo was unfair. Gizmodo removed a large number of links and graphics from the document before they published their copy of the document, and the majority of the shitstorm that has followed this Googler's memorandum, as it were, being published has been based upon Gizmodo's representation of the document and not the document itself. I will include a link in the description to the original document. Please take time to read this. It is a very sober critique on the culture at Google. And Google has seen fit to fire the man, James, I'll remember his last name. His name is James, and he's not a hard right-winger. He defines himself as a classic liberal, someone who's concerned with personal freedom and individual choice. And his document, his choice of language, reflects that personality trait. So first, let's look at the response from the diversity officer, who basically chose to demonize James's characterization of the choices that men and women make differently in the workforce, and his blasphemy of attributing that at least some of those decisions are behavioral traits that are more or less intrinsic to their genetics. That is, we can observe in large populations of men and women that men and women generally make different decisions in how they balance work and personal life. And that is blasphemy in Silicon Valley. That will get you blacklisted. That is probably the reason why James got fired, and why he will probably never work for another large corporation on the West Coast again, because he has committed capital heresy. Next, I want to briefly cover a response from a former Googler by the name of Jonathan. I'll try and find the link for his blog post, but no promises. He has a very long response on Medium, and rather than addressing any of the core arguments that James made about specifically the culture at Google, where if you aren't inside their filter bubble, if you don't fall within their bias, you are regarded with a degree of hostility. Rather than addressing that central claim, Jonathan got bogged down in some character assassination, some of it justified, but largely the pedantics of saying, well, no, science actually doesn't support any of the arguments that he made here, and his releasing this document that could potentially damage the culture at Google is irresponsible and dangerous, and it shouldn't have been circulated, and blah, blah, blah. I'll try and find the blog post on Medium so you can actually read it for yourself. Both the diversity officer and this former Google employee didn't read the actual document. They didn't read the actual memorandum. Or if they did read it, they read the Gizmodo version that stripped a large amount of the meat from the document, and they didn't understand the central argument that James was making. I've had to ignore a number of very left-leaning people that I associate with on Twitter and other places over this, because very few people that I've talked to have actually read the original material and understood the original material. And it's not extremely difficult. It's not offensive. It doesn't make any categorical, sweeping judgments. He's wanting to be able to have an open discourse to improve the culture at Google to specifically eliminate discriminatory practices that they have, where certain classes and certain tracks are ideologically gated, where you have to fit into a particular wedge group. You have to be some disabled midget minority with the right skin color and gender orientation with personal pronouns to even get into whatever program this might happen to be. Or they have diversity quotas that they fairly strictly enforce, and it's destroying the productivity at Google and destroying the culture at Google. And he wants to open a dialogue where they can work together basically as a family and make the culture at Google work better and be more productive for Google, instead of making everybody more sensitive to every perceived microaggression and microtransaction that could possibly trigger a special snowflake. And just to prove his point, Google has fired him. So they were put in a tough situation. They could either keep him on, the political dissident that he has become, just to prove him wrong, or they can fire him, which would ultimately prove all of his points right. And the categorical, sweeping dismissal of everything he had to say about the culture, the extreme leftist partisan culture at Google, has been demonstrated to be absolutely true and correct. I don't think this was perhaps the best thing to do at work, but he was specifically addressing problems that he had with the culture at work. My understanding of the way a lot of this stuff works on the West Coast, going to HR with any of his grievances, he would be ignored, and it would just exacerbate his frustrations. So he was trying to spark a conversation at a kind of a grassroots level in order to filter that up through the ranks. Go read this document. It's absolutely worth it. If you don't want to read it, I've already read it to you. So go read it go listen to me read it to you on my channel. It was late, I was tired, I wasn't wearing my glasses, and I stumbled over my words a little bit, but I read it to you. So take 20 minutes out of your day and go do this.